Leaving Cheyenne by Larry McMurtry. This book consists of 253 pages and is divided into 3 parts, subdivided into varying numbers of chapters. The following information appears on the dust jacket of the book. A major novel by the author of Horsemen Pass By and The Last Picture Show. A rarity, funny, wonderful, heartbreaking, exhilarating. The New York Times Book Review. Larry McMurtry's Cheyenne is not a place on the map. It's a part of life, the best part. Leaving Cheyenne tells of a love triangle unlike any other. Gideon Fry, heir to a Texas ranch, Johnny McLeod, his cowboy friend, and Molly, whom they both love, and who bears each of them a son. Gid, Molly, and Johnny take turns narrating a story that spans 40 years, the story of how finally they all left Cheyenne. Uncompromisingly honest, sometimes coarse, but deeply human, bestsellers. A compelling story, consummate skill, San Francisco Chronicle. To Jo, for her gallantry and her integrity, with my love. My foot's in the stirrup, my pony won't stand. Goodbye, old partner, I'm leaving Cheyenne. The Cheyenne of this book is that part of the cowboy's day's circle which is earliest and best, his blood's country and his heart's pasture land. L.M. Part 1. The Blood's Country. South of my day's circle, part of my blood's country, rises that tableland, clean, lean, hungry country. I know it dark against the stars, the high, lean country, full of old stories that still go walking in my sleep. Judith Wright, from South of My Days. Chapter 1. When I woke up, Dad was standing by the bed shaking my foot. I opened my eyes, but he never stopped shaking it. He shook it like it was a fence post, and he was testing it to see if it was in the ground solid enough. All my life that's the way he'd wake me up. I hated it like poison. Once I offered to set a glass of water by the bed so he could pour that over me in the mornings and wake me up, but Dad wouldn't do it. I set the water out for him 6 or 7 times, and he just let it sit and shook my foot anyway. Sometimes, though, if he was thirsty, he'd drink the water first. Get up from there, he said. If you're big enough to vote, you don't need to sleep past daylight. You do the chores today. I'm going to trot off down in the pasture and look around. One of them scrawny heifers might have calved, for all I know. And off he went as usual. The last time Dad done the chores was when I was 12 years old, and the only reason he done them then was because I had let the axe slip and cut my foot nearly off. I never did know what he done down in the pasture every morning. By the time I could get the horses fed and the milking done, he'd be back. For once, though, I was kind of glad he woke me up. It was election day, and my sly friend Johnny had worked it around somehow so that he and Molly got to watch the ballot box during the first shift. There was supposed to be at least 2 people to a shift. What he figured was that nobody would be there to vote till after dinner, so he could do a little courting with Molly on the government's time. Only I didn't intend to let him get away with it. I never liked to see a man cheat on the government. I done the chores a little too quick. By 6:30 I didn't have a thing left to do, and I knew there wasn't any use getting to the schoolhouse before about 8 o'clock. It was just over on Idiot Ridge, about a 10-minute ride. If there's one thing I can't do at all, it's wait. So I got a rag and polished the saddle a little, and that was a mistake. It was a pleasure to polish a saddle like that. The mistake was that Dad walked in and caught me. You needn't jump, he said, and you needn't try to hide it. I found it day before yesterday anyhow. It's a nice saddle. Why ain't you been using it? I had put the saddle under a tarp way back in the dark end of an empty oat bin, but you couldn't hide nothing from Dad. Because it ain't mine, I said. Hell, it ain't, he said, a little surprised. What'd you do, steal it? You aggravate the piss out of me, I said. I never stole a penny in my life, and you know it. Plenty's waited longer than you to start. Whose is it, then? Didn't you see the nameplate, I said? It's sterling silver. Looks like you'd have noticed it. I had this saddle made for Johnny, and I just haven't got around to giving it to him yet. For once Dad was flabbergasted. I knew he would be, but I didn't see no sense in lying to him. Giving it to him, he said. You're giving a $150 saddle to a $30 a month cowboy? That wouldn't make sense to a crazy man, and it sure don't to me. "Well, I can't help it, Dad," I said. "Johnny did me a big favor, which I ain't at liberty to talk about. Nobody ever did me that much favor before, and I may live to be older than you without nobody doing me that much favor again. Johnny never owned a quality piece of equipment his whole life. I had the money, and I just thought I'd get him something he could use. There's nothing wrong with that." Dad had real black eyes, and when he wanted to look fierce, he didn't look it halfway. He looked fierce then. "Giving a saddle like that to a McLeod is like pinning a diamond stud pin on a goat's ass," he said. "Favor or no favor. And besides, whatever money you had come from me." "Johnny ain't sorry," I said. "Being poor don't make him no count. I worked plenty hard for the money I spent on this saddle, and if you think I'm overpaid, hire you another hand." "Settle down," he said. "I ain't gonna whip you. You're too old. Let's go outside. You can polish his saddle some other time." We went out and stood by the water trough and looked at the cattle grazing down in the field pasture, just this side of the river. I washed the saddle soap off my hands. "Ain't this a good ranch?" Dad said. "I put a lot of work and a lot of years into it, but by God, I've got it all back in money and satisfaction." "Go on and bawl me out," I said. "I've got some pretty urgent business to get to this morning." "You sure have," he said. "You've got to rush over to the schoolhouse and see if you can keep your good friend Johnny from getting in Miss Molly's pants. If you can keep him out, you figure you'll eventually get in. Well, suppose you just sit here and listen about 5 minutes. You might learn something." "I don't like the way you talk about my friends," I said. "Pity," he said. "I'm going to have to leave this ranch to you someday. Now, I want you to get to taking that serious. I ain't mad about the saddle, but you took off and left right in the middle of the calving season. You never gave me no warning or nothing, and you took that McLeod kid with you. And you've never said one word to me about where you've been or why. That don't add up to very sensible behavior, and I ain't too happy about leaving this ranch to somebody who ain't sensible. I don't care what Kenny is to me." "Well, I'm as sorry as I can be, and you know it," I said, "but there ain't nothing I can tell you about that. I just had to leave." He sat there and looked off down the pasture. Dad was getting quite a bit of age on him. "Nobody ever did me favor enough in my entire life for me to waste $200 on them," he said. "I guess by the time I'm dead 10 years, you'll have thrown away what I spent 50 years making. Old age is a worthless damn thing." "Oh, hush," I said. "By the time I've run this ranch for 10 years, it's liable to be twice the size it is now. Yeah, and I'm liable to flap my arms and take off from here and fly like a buzzard any minute now," he said. "That sure is a good saddle. I'll tell you one thing, Johnny McLeod ain't no favorite of mine." "Well, you ain't no favorite of his either that I know of," I said. I went and put the tarp back over the saddle, and Dad went up to the house to eat. Of course, things never worked like I planned. Dad had found a sick yearling that morning, but he never took time to doctor it himself, so I had to catch a horse and go hunt it up and doctor it before I could go to the voting place. It was after 9 o'clock when I got there, and Johnny and Molly had been there since 8. I hated it so bad I could taste it. They were sitting on the schoolhouse steps when I loped up. She was letting Johnny hold her hand, and they were both grinning. Oh, me, Molly looked pretty. She had on a blue and white polka dot dress, and her long black hair was whipping around in the wind. There wasn't another soul around. Johnny was looking wild and reckless, so no telling what had went on. Molly was just a sucker when it come to Johnny. "Look who's here," he said. "What happened? You ain't but an hour early. Where's your friend Ikey?" "I've been working," I said. "Hello, Molly." I knew he'd bring Ikey up, but I didn't intend to talk about it. Ikey was a nigger, but he was a nigger that could vote, and he was supposed to be partners with me to watch the voting box. Molly had already promised she would stay a while with me after Johnny's shift was up, so what I had to do was figure out a way to get rid of Ikey quick. Johnny knew just what I was up to, of course, but it wasn't going to do him any good. "Get down," Molly said. She grinned at me as sweet as ever, but Johnny still had a hold of her hand, and she never made him turn loose. I couldn't think of too much to say, so I took my horse over and tied him to a mesquite. I went in and was going to vote, but they had been so busy spooning around they hadn't even unpacked the ballots, and I had to do it. I never voted, though. I forgot about it. I don't think I voted in that election at all. Molly had finally got her hand loose, and when she stood up, we all went over to the cistern and got a drink. "What's that I smell on you, Gid?" Johnny said. "Smells like screwworm dope. You ought to taken a bath before you come to work for the government." "You don't smell like no prairie flower yourself," I said. "Been trapping any skunks lately?" When Johnny was just a boy, the McLeods had had to sell skunk hides to keep going. They wasn't the only ones, of course, but Johnny hated skunks worse than anything. His folks had finally got better off, but they still just had a little two-section place. Not lately, he said, but it kind of irritated him. Molly, she never taken sides when me and Johnny argued. She would just stand there and grin her pretty, friendly grin and curl a loop of her hair around one finger. She was pretty as a picture when she done that. It didn't seem like I'd been there no time when Ikey come. He had an old brown mule that was about half cripple. He rode the mule bareback wherever he went. We seen Ikey coming, and Johnny began to grin. He always had some trick to play on Ikey, and most of them were funny. "Looky there," he said. "Here he comes, riding that three-legged mule. I tell you what, Gid, someday let's saw that crippled leg off. That way it won't drag and slow Ikey down." "You hush that," Molly said. "How'd you like to have one of your legs sawed off?" "I might like it," he said. "You want to saw one off for me?" "That's no way to talk. Make him hush, Gid." She sidled over toward me just a little bit. Johnny just looked that much more devilish. "What he needs is his damn head sawed off," I said. "That's the only kind of sawing that would do him any good." Ikey arrived about then and got off his mule. "Good morning, Miss Molly," he said. "Morning, Mr. Johnny. Morning, Mr. Gid." The thing that worried me about Ikey was that he was so proud of being good enough to watch a ballot box like the white folks that he probably wasn't going to be in too big a hurry to leave. But I figured I could persuade him. "Morning, Ikey," Johnny said. "Why didn't you shoot that poor old mule and put him out of his misery?" I had to grin at that. Ikey was as surprised as if Johnny had asked him to shoot his wife. He thought he had one of the best mules in the country. "Shoot this mule," he said, looking at it real close. "Then how'd I get around?" "Don't pay any attention to him," Molly said. "He's crazy. Come on in and vote, Ikey." I was all for that, so I went in and fixed him up a ballot. I thought if we made a big enough thing of him voting, Ikey might be satisfied and go on home. "Boy, this is a big election," I said. "They say every vote is going to be important. Think it over good, Ikey. Don't be in too big a hurry." "No, don't excite Ikey," Johnny said. "He might stab himself with that pencil. It ain't worth the trouble, Ikey. The man with the most money is going to get it anyway. It always turns out that way." "It don't, do it?" Molly said. She never liked to hear anybody run down politics. I guess it was because her old man had been commissioner for our precinct one year. Everybody criticized him, so she had to take up for him twice as hard as she usually done. He was the most thieving commissioner there ever was, besides the most lazy, and Molly knew it. She just never would admit it, to herself or nobody else. Her daddy didn't get elected because he was the man with the most money. He got elected because he was the man with the most whiskey to give away. There weren't but 12 people in the precinct able to vote, and he gave every one of them a jug of whiskey and still only won by 1 vote. The man that was running against him was too decent to vote for himself, and Old Man Taylor wasn't, so he won it. Afterward, he got hold of the ballots and found out who voted against him and went around and got his jugs back from those. I know that's true because one of the ones that voted against him was Dad, and the jug was damn sure all he got back. I guess Molly was the only person in the world who ever liked that old man. Ikey, though, he never paid any attention to what we were saying to him. He was set up so he could just pay attention to one thing at a time, and right then he was paying attention to voting. He got out his spectacles that he was so proud of and polished them on his pants leg and put them on and adjusted them so he could see over them. It's a damn cinch he couldn't see through them. It would have been like looking through a pair of stove lids. After he got them set so they wouldn't interfere with his vision, he began to read the ballot. That took so long that me and Johnny had to go off behind the schoolhouse to pee before he got through. We left Molly there to help Ikey read. "You sneaky bastard," I said when we got out. "How long was you all over here before I come?" "Why, I'm ashamed of myself about that," he said. "Don't you think I've got a pretty girl, though?" "I think Molly's a pretty girl, all right," I said, "but you ain't got her by a long shot. Why don't you take after Mabel Peters, anyway?" "Why, Mabel's crazy about you," he said. "Watch where you're pissing. You get it on these gabardine pants and your name's mud. I mean it." Actually, I just splattered a little on his boots. "It's about time you were going home, ain't it?" "Why, yes," he said. "I'll go get Molly." He went, but he never got her. I went, too. She walked out the door with him, and he had her hand again. But she must have told him she had promised to stay a while with me. He didn't look too cheerful. I went on in to help Ikey. He was sitting there licking his pencil, and after he'd done that about 5 minutes, he voted. Good Lord, I said, I just remembered something. I was supposed to cut a big patch of cuckleburs today down on the river. Dad's been after me about that for 2 weeks. Well, then, why don't you go cut them, Johnny said. I'll stay here and do your turn at the voting box. You just go right ahead. Oh, no, I said, I wouldn't want nobody to do that. That's my responsibility. Don't worry so much, Molly said. I guess she was so sweet it never occurred to her what I was really worrying about. It damn sure occurred to Johnny. He'd better worry, he said. I wouldn't want Mr. Fry mad at me. I think his best chance is just to forget about this voting and go do his work. Well, I said, since you're so anxious to help, I wonder if you'd like to lope off down there and cut them for me. It wouldn't take more than 4 hours. That got into us quick. Hell no, I wouldn't like to, he said. I'm a cowboy. I ain't no damn cucklebur chopper. Well, Ikey, what all do you have to do today, I said. Maybe I can hire you to do it. I'll give you $2, and you don't need to worry about watching this voting. Miss Molly's going to stay here a little while, and she'll be glad to do your part for you. Ikey didn't give any argument at all. I wasn't much expecting him to. His normal wage was about $1 a day. I'll cut 'em and be glad, he said. I'll just be glad. I gave him the $2, and that settled it. That much money was such a shock to him that he couldn't hardly get it in his pocketbook. Then he folded up his ballot real slow and careful and looked kind of sad about having to drop it in the box. One thing about him, he really liked to vote. Then he got up and put away his spectacles. Well, I'll go cut 'em, Mr. Gid, he said. I sure enjoyed the election day, Miss Molly. I hope we have another one soon as we can. Molly kind of laughed. We will, she said. We'll have one in November. You be careful, Ikey. Don't chop off your foot, and don't get on no snakes. Ikey got on his mule and went off. Johnny just grinned and winked at Molly. It was hard to get his goat. I wish I was well off enough to hire my dirty work done, he said, but I ain't that lucky. I always have to do my own. I never noticed you doing much, I said. Besides, I felt sorry for Ikey. I'd like to see him get himself a better mule. If that ain't a lie, I never heard one, he said. Ikey's going to spend that money on whiskey, and you knew it before you gave it to him. And you'll probably talk him out of 3/4 of that. You can't fool me. Why, Gid, I heard you quit drinking, Molly said. I didn't know you started again. I haven't, I said. Johnny's just spoofing you. Well, I gotta be going, Johnny said. He'd done all the damage he dared do. Don't you all take no bribes under $5. That made Molly mad, so he was smart to leave. She was kind of patriotic and never liked to hear people hint about crooked government. It was because her old man was so crooked himself. Anyway, Johnny got on his horse and loped off, and there we were. It was about 10 o'clock, and I didn't figure we much needed to worry about anybody coming to vote before dinner time. Voting is the kind of thing most people like to put off as long as they can. I looked at Molly, and she was looking at me and grinning. I guess she knew good and well what I was up to, rushing Ikey off. Well, Mr. Fry, she said, you sure was in a big hurry to chase everybody off. That wasn't very sociable. I ain't very sociable with crowds, I said, especially not crowds with Johnny in them. I kind of reached for her hand, but I missed. She laughed and stepped out the schoolhouse door. The wind began whipping her hair up around her face. You're grabby, she said. Grabby, Mr. Fry. Don't call me that, I said, and don't put on that away. Let's go around to the cistern. Okay, she said, let's do. Only you're so unsociable. I might just better go home. I got her hand after all and squeezed it, and she squeezed back. I'm a lot more sociable where you're concerned, I said. I got my big slicker off my saddle and spread it out by the cistern so we could sit down without the grass and the chiggers eating us up. We got on the shady side and leaned up against the rocks and just sat there. It was right on the hill, high enough that we could see anybody coming a long time before they would notice us. Molly let me put my arm around her, and she kind of slumped against me and talked about this and that. I mostly listened. After a while, my arm went to sleep, but I didn't dare move. Her hair was in my face. She must have washed it that morning because it was real clean, and I could still barely smell the vinegar she rinsed it in. It's a nice day for election, she said. Look at the way the grass waves. I bet we can see nearly all over the county from here. I kept wishing she'd turn her face around, but she wouldn't do it. "Giddington," she said. "What are you doing back there, where I can't see you?" She called me that sometimes. She thought Gid was too short a name. I was agreeable. "Don't you wish I'd turned my face around so you could kiss me?" she said. "Now don't you?" "I could stand it," I said. "You won't, though." "You think I should let a boy kiss me on election day?" she said, and then she turned around anyway and let me. Some of her hair was between me and her mouth. I didn't care. Only after a while she began to giggle and squirm. "Let me fix it," she said. "Who wants to kiss hair?" She sat up and turned her back, and all I could see was black hair and her polka-dot dress. Then she rolled over on the slicker and propped up on her elbows. "Let's quit," she said. "Let's just talk. What if Johnny was to come back?" "What if? It ain't none of his business what we do." "He thinks it is, though." I made her let me kiss her again, but she kept giggling and wouldn't get serious about it. "Johnny thinks it's all his business," she said. "He keeps asking me all about us." "Well, he can just cut it out," I said. "I'm not going to put up with much more of him. You're my girl now, ain't you?" "Am I?" she said, looking up at me through her hair, half grinning and half serious. "I think I'm too silly for you." "No, you ain't. Why, I'm worse that way than you are." "No, you ain't," she said, and she wasn't kidding. "You're not even as silly as Johnny, and he's not as silly as me. Eddie's the only one who is." "If you mean he's the only one who's dumb, you're right," I said. I hated that sorry Eddie. "At least I'm a little smart. I'm smart enough to know you're the prettiest girl there is." I made her let me kiss her again, and finally it shut her up, and she got real quiet and sweet. Once you get Molly quiet, she's the warmest, sweetest girl in the world. "I still think you're my girl," I said. "Maybe I am," she said. "Lay down here and hush." She hugged me real tight, and just about that time we heard Ikey's mule. I could tell that mule a quarter of a mile away. "Damn it all," I said, "Ikey's coming back. I'd like to wring Johnny's neck. I know damn good and well he put him up to it." "Let's just lay here," she said. "Let's don't get up. Maybe if Ikey sees us he'll go on away, or we could run hide." "No," I said. "Damn Johnny anyway. I'll get even with him. I don't want Ikey to see us, and it's silly to hide. I ain't going to do that." She got up and I folded the slicker. "Brush the grass off my dress," she said. "I got off the slicker." She turned her back and I brushed her off. She didn't really look mad, and she put her arm around me and let me hold her hand even while Ikey was coming up. But she kept looking off across the pasture, off down Idiot Ridge. "Where did you get that dress?" I said. "It's awful pretty, Molly." "I made it, thank you." She looked up then and seen I had grass on my cheek, and she brushed it off with her hand. "You just ain't very silly, are you?" she said. Chapter 2. Johnny never would admit he sent Ikey back. He was too stubborn, but I knew he was the one responsible. I finally got Ikey sent off again, but it was too late. Ikey wasn't hardly out of sight the second time before Dad come, of all people. Dad made out like he come to vote, but he never. He just come to see what I was doing. He knew I was there with Molly, and he just thought he'd come and spy a little. I hated it like poison when he did something like that. Molly, she never minded. She always took up for Dad, and I guess he liked her for it. He always treated her like she was the prize of the world. Except when I got to talking about marrying her, then he got mad. "Don't be a damn fool and marry young," he said, "especially not to no poor woman. Work about 30 more years and make you lots of money, then go off somewhere and marry a rich widow. Don't never marry somebody who's as broke and ignorant as you are. Marry somebody who knows a little about it. Then you might have a chance to enjoy yourself a little." That was Dad for you. I didn't pay him much mind. He never could understand that he wasn't me. What I knew was that Johnny McLeod had two things coming. One was a good saddle, and the other was a good whipping. I guess he thought I had a whipping coming, too, because he started it all. About a week after Election Day, old man Ashtoe, the feller Johnny was cowboying for, sent him up to Henrietta with a little bunch of cattle he wanted delivered. Johnny delivered the cattle all right, but then he bought some whiskey from somebody and got drunk and insulted a deputy sheriff or two and got put in jail. Soon as he got home, old man Ashtoe fired him, and Johnny was so broke he had to take a job with a harvesting crew. The first day he worked with them was the day they were finishing up harvesting our oats. Dad had me out helping them, of course. "Ain't this hell?" Johnny said when we were going out that afternoon for another big load of shocks. "A cowboy oughtn't to do work like this. This here's clodhopper work. It's a kind of disgrace, ain't it to you?" "Not to me," I said. "I don't have no choice about it. It's a real disgrace where you're concerned, though. If you'd have behaved right, you could be horseback right now." "I never asked for no sermons," he said, grinning at me. "You got just as much oat seed in your hair as I have. Where you want to work, on the wagon or on the ground?" "On the wagon," I said. "You're such a good hand with a pitchfork, I don't want you to get out of practice." We worked for about an hour, I guess. He threw the shocks up to me with the fork, and I stacked them on the wagon. The wagon was stacked up pretty high. "I just need 8 or 10 more," I said. "Let's hurry, then we can take a rest." He stuck his fork in a big shock, and I noticed him stop to look at it pretty close. I figured there was a rattlesnake under it. We had killed 5 or 6 that day. Oat shocks were a great place for rattlesnakes because so many rats lived under them. It was awful hot, and I started to take my gloves off to wipe my face. Then Johnny picked up the shock and got ready to heave. I seen it coming and reached out to catch it, but just before I got my hands on it, this big snakehead came right up between my hands and hissed in my face. It scared the piss out of me, and I went to running backward for all I was worth. But the shock kept right on coming till it looked like the snake was going to fall right on my face. I kicked like hell and went off the wagon backward, fighting with my hands to keep the snake out of my lap. I never seen where it went, because I hit the ground like I'd fallen off a cloud. I never rolled an inch. In a little while I heard a lot of people laughing, and one of them was Johnny. I looked around, and Johnny and 3 or 4 of the harvesters were about to bust their guts laughing. Then I seen the snake sliding off the wagon wheel. It was an old brown bull snake was all. It was mad, too, but not no madder than I was. I had to lay back down. I was seeing spots before my eyes. "We better help him up," one of them said. "He might have busted something." "Hell no, he'll be up in a minute," Johnny said. "You better get back to work or you'll be the one with something busted." I propped up on my elbows and looked at him. "You're a damn bastard," I said. "What if that had been a rattlesnake?" "It couldn't have scared you any worse," he said. "Besides, I seen what it was." "Well, you better take a good look at the world," I said, getting up on my hands and knees. "You won't be able to see much when I get through with you." "Goodness me," he said. "Maybe that'll teach you not to fiddle with my girl." I was beginning to feel the blood coming back from wherever it went to when I seen that snake. Johnny was standing about 10 feet away, leaning against the wagon wheel and grinning. "She's no such a thing, your girl," I said. Then I went for him, and we had it out right there. I nearly got the best of him right off, but then I got to missing every time I swung at him. I guess the fall had thrown off my aim. Pretty soon I got tired, and he did too, but we just kept standing there, pounding the piss out of one another. Finally, we both stopped for a minute. "When you've had enough, say calf rope," I said. "I don't want to put you in no hospital." "Calf rope your ass," he said. "You're going to bleed to death if we don't quit." "Hell," I said, "my nose always bleeds in the summertime." "Let's quit anyway," he said. "Get a drink of water. You quit first." "Nope." "Then we'll just have to stand here till you drop," he said. "I never seen such a stubborn bastard." We might have stood there till dark, I don't know. Finally, the boss harvester noticed us and came over. "Damn, boys," he said, "why don't you fight with the pitchforks next time? There won't be so much blood that way." "He started it," I said. "Load the wagon," he said. "You can fight some more tonight if you want to." So I wiped off a little blood, and Johnny got his pitchfork, and we finished making up the load. He never threw up no more snakes, either. Finally, we got all the oats we could haul and went to the barn. Johnny rode on the seat with me. "Shit fire," he said. "I'm quitting this job. I ain't no damn clodhopper, and I ain't going to let no fat ass like that give me orders." "What are you going to do for money when you quit?" I asked. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "You know what, Gid? I think I'll go to the Panhandle. This here country ain't no place for a cowboy. It's all right if you got your own ranch like you have, but if you ain't, it's no good. I'd like to go up on the plains, where them big ranches are, and do some real cowboying. I'm tired of sitting around here listening to my old man bitch at me. I think I'll just strike out." "I wouldn't mind going with you," I said. "Hell, working for Dad's worse than being a hired hand. He thinks he has to tell me every move to make." "Then let's go," he said. He was excited about it. But I knew I never would be able to get away from Dad. There was too much that needed doing around the place that he couldn't do. Besides, we had done been gone 2 months to that hospital. I pulled the wagon over in the shade of the barn, and we got down. "Let's go over to the horse trough," I said. Wash this blood off. I figured if he was going off to punch cattle, I had better give him his saddle, even if I was still mad at him. "Well, you coming with me?" he said. Then he bent over and ducked his head plumb under the water and came up shaking it like a wet dog. "I don't reckon so," I said. "I guess I got too much to do here." "Too much cowboying or too much courting? Which one?" "You better watch out," I said. "I ain't going to take no more off you today." He slapped his hat back on without even drying his hair. "Hell, I ain't eager to go off and leave Molly either," he said, "but a man's got to get out and see a little of the world in his life. I guess there'll be some pretty sweet girls up there." "Not that sweet," I said. "Let's unload the hay." "I may not go after all," he said. But stacking those damn itchy oats in the hot oat bin almost got us down. I guess we was both weak from the fight. "Oh, hell," he said when we finished. "Piss on this. This here'll kill a good cowboy in a week. It takes weak-minded bastards to stand this kind of work. I'm quitting." "I don't blame you," I said, and I didn't. It would be the real life up on the plains, with all those big ranches and cow outfits. I just couldn't manage it, though. "Come around here," I said. "I got something for you." We went around in the hallway of the barn, and I drug out the saddle. He never knew what to make of it. "That's a beauty," he said. "Whose is it?" "Yours," I said. "I thought you ought to have it for going up to the hospital with me and taking care of me all that time. If you're going off to cowboy, you'll get some use out of this." "Well, my God," he said, "you don't mean it. Why, ain't it a beauty? That's as nice a saddle as I ever seen. Yeah, it ought to last you a long time." "Well, damn. Sure much obliged, kid," he said, feeling of the leather. "This here's something to be proud of. I never had nothing this well made in my life. Let's try it out," I said. "It's too late to haul oats today." We caught a couple of horses and went for a ride. I never saw Johnny so tickled over anything or so excited. He rode it a while, and then I rode it a while, and it rode like a rocking chair. It was a little creaky and new, but he would ride that out of it in a hurry. We got back to the barn just in time to start the evening chores. Dad was out fiddling around in the lots, watching the milk pen calves. "Well, this settles it," Johnny said. "I ain't wasting a saddle like this on this part of the country. I think I'll leave in a day or two. Sure wish you'd go with me." "Can't make it," I said. "You better wait till them eyes get better. Ain't nobody gonna hire a blind man." "Blind my ass," he said. "What about your nose?" "It ain't very bad squashed. It'll straighten out." Dad finally come toddling over and looked at the saddle some. "Well, I see you boys been beating on one another," he said. "Too bad neither of you had any sense to beat into the other one." "Oh, we wasn't out for blood," Johnny said. Dad got a big laugh when he told him about me reaching out for the snake. Johnny could tell things so they sounded a whole lot funnier than they were. "What do you think about my new saddle, Mr. Fry?" Johnny asked. Dad just grunted. "I think it's a better one than I ever had," he said, "and I'm 4 times your age and several times your smart." He walked off toward the house. Johnny winked at me, and I grinned. Dad never got Johnny's goat quite, and it tickled me. 2 days later, Johnny rode to Henrietta and pitched his saddle in the caboose and took the train north. That left me and Molly with the country to ourselves. But I was kind of sorry to see old Johnny go. He was a good buddy, even if he was a smart aleck, and I felt lonesome whenever he wasn't around. Chapter 3. I guess Dad had been hoping I'd change my mind and keep the new saddle for myself. When Johnny actually took off and left the country with it, it put Dad in such a bad humor he never got over it for a month. And when he was in a bad humor, he could think up a million mean jobs for me to do. I spent the last part of July and the whole damn month of August digging corner post holes and cleaning out sewer lines and cutting devil's claws and plowing. I hated the plowing the worst. And all the time I was down in the field eating dust and yanking on the damn contrary mules, Johnny was up on the plains riding his new saddle and living like a cowboy should. I got so tired of thinking about it that one day I just come right out and told Dad I was pretty much in the notion to go up there too. "The hell with you," he said. We were riding one of the river pastures looking for screwworms, and Dad rode up on the hill and stopped his horse long enough to tell me off. "You'll just stay right where you are," he said. "And if I tell you to plow, by God, you plow." "But I ain't no damn farmer," I said. "Why don't you hire your farming done? Why do I have to waste my time doing it?" "I am hiring it done, and you're the one I'm hiring," he said. "Why pay somebody else to do something we can do ourselves? That ain't no way to get rich." "I see a few cattle down toward the southwest corner," I said. "What makes you think I want to be rich anyway?" "Because I bred you," he said. "I know damn well I couldn't breed a boy with so little sense as to want to be poor. You got enough sense to know it's better to be rich than poor, ain't you?" "That ain't what the Bible says," I said. He just looked at me. "I ain't responsible for what the Bible says," he said. "If it says that, it's wrong. And I never asked you for no preaching either. I know there's fools in the world who say poverty is holy, but you let them go without shoes some cold winter like I did when I was a kid, and then see how holy they think it is. Being poor just makes people little and mean most of the time. It's a damn degrading thing." "All right," I said, "hold your horses. I don't want to be poor." "But you cannot want to be poor and still not care whether you're rich or not." "Yes, and them's the kind of people that never accomplish nothing," he said. "They're just damn mediocre. If you're going to try at all, you ought to try for something big." "Well, I'll never get nothing big from plowing that worn-out field." "You might," he said. "You might plow up a diamond, you don't know. I count 20 cattle in that corner." "I just counted 18. Let's go get them." "I ain't finishing telling you what's good for you yet. Now, you got the itch to go up on the plains and cowboy just because Johnny McLeod's up there. Now, I'll tell you about Johnny McLeod. He's a good cowhand, and he ain't scared of nothing, I'll admit that. But that's the limitation of him right there. He'll never be nothing but a damn good cowhand. When he dies, he'll own just what he's got on and what he's inherited. And that saddle you gave him, if he don't lose it in a poker game first, he'd fiddle around his whole life working for wages and never accomplish a damn thing." "That don't make him bad," I said. "Course not. It don't make him bad at all. I've known a lot of fellers like him, and some of them I liked a lot. The point is, you ain't like that. You've got too much of me in you. Punching somebody else's cows never would satisfy you. But you might waste a lot of time before you figure that out. The man that gets the farthest is the man that wastes the least time and the least energy he possibly can. You ain't old enough to know that yet, but I am. If you can just learn to listen to me, you'll save yourself a lot of misery." "I guess you know everything in the world, don't you?" I said. "I don't guess you was ever known to be wrong, was you?" "Oh, yes, I've been wrong. I've been wrong more times than most people have been right. But that ain't no significance. I've also done forgot more than most people ever know." "But anyhow," he said, "it don't take much sense to figure out that you and Johnny are two different kinds of people. Let's go look at them cattle." We doctored a few worms and was riding home down the lane late in the afternoon. It was close to sundown, and Dad had worn down a little around the edges. "Gid," he said, "now there's no need for you to go around feeling sorry for yourself for 2 months just because you have to plow an oat field once in a while. Before you're my age, you'll have had all the cowboying you need. A man that's training himself to run a ranch has got to be able to do all kinds of things." "You can say all you want to," I said. "I still wish I'd gone to the Panhandle. I ain't training to be no oat planter. I intend to enjoy my life." "If that ain't a fine ambition," he said, "why, any damn fool can enjoy himself. What makes you think life's supposed to be enjoyed anyhow?" "Well," I said, "if you ain't supposed to enjoy it, what are you supposed to do with it? Fight it. Fight the hell out of it." And then he got to talking about the cattle and the screw worms and about how dry it was. He said he'd like to build some new tanks if he thought he'd have the pleasure of living long enough to see them full. We didn't argue no more. In a way I wanted to go, and in a way I didn't. Old as Dad was getting, and as much work as there was to do, I wouldn't have been too happy about going off and leaving him. There would be too many times when I'd have to think about him making the rounds by himself, and that would have spoiled the fun. When it come right down to it, Dad and I got along pretty well. All that time I was in the hospital, I kept thinking about him home working, and it bothered me worse than the stuff itself. Johnny and me was different that way. His dad was just as old and had about as much to do, but it never bothered Johnny to go off and leave him. Of course, Johnny's mother was still alive, but he just figured his dad could take care of himself. If I did stay home, it wouldn't make no difference, he said. Daddy would be out working himself to death anyway, only he'd be working me to death along with him. I can't see no profit in that. He was right, I guess. It's just all in the way you feel about a thing like that. Me being home never slowed Dad down either. But at least if I was there, I didn't have to fight no guilty conscience. One good thing about having old Johnny out of the country was that I didn't have to watch Molly so close all the time.